Olá, estamos aqui nas nossas conversas. Eu estou com a professora, doutora Cariad Astles, do Reino Unido, das universidades de Exeter e da Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, de Londres. E nós vamos conversar um pouco sobre a ideia que ela teve de juntar uma série de professores de teatro de bonecos ao longo do mundo para conversar e tentar traçar algumas alternativas de ensino na modalidade remota e também uma série de desdobramentos muito interessantes que ela realiza a partir daí. So, moving back to English, hi Cariad, how are you?
Hi Mario, thank you for the introduction. I can more or less understand Portuguese, but to speak like this, I need to probably talk in English. So thank you for inviting me. I'm fine.
Yeah, no, we're going to have subtitles for this conversation, you know? Well, let me first ask you about all this idea of getting teachers, puppetry teachers all around the world together. Well, it's a kind of a straightforward problem. Let's get everyone together and talk about the situation. But I would like to explain to us a bit how did the idea came and how it was to set this massive enterprise up.
Sure. Well, you know, like so many of us, the pandemic just came upon us and we already had teaching planned. I'm a university teacher of puppetry, and suddenly I had a class that was coming of master's students and bachelor's students who were expecting to be in a space learning about puppetry performance. And the university said, oh, you must do everything online now. Performance is a tactile, relational, somatic experience of being in close contact. It's the opposite of what we're being told to do. It's an experience of listening to somebody else's body and breathing with somebody else. And suddenly we were supposed to be doing all this online. So basically, I started preparing my classes. I found very quickly that to teach theoretical and historical and contextual material online was not really a problem. Even to teach things like making puppets through video tutorials and online tutorials was really, again, not very difficult. It's not the same, but it wasn't very difficult. But teaching performance practice of puppets was very difficult because people were in their own homes. Mostly they didn't even have puppets with them. Some of them did, some of them didn't. Some of them were makers, some of them were not makers. And I started really thinking deeply about the kinds of things that we could teach online that would make sense. Some people were saying, let's not do any puppetry performance online because it makes no sense. But the more I was thinking about it, the more I thought, well, we have this as an opportunity. So actually we should take the challenge and we should meet this challenge, try and find out what this difficult situation can actually offer us. One of the things that was obvious was that we were working with the screen, the frame of the screen that suddenly was the only way in which we could communicate. And puppetry is so often framed. It so often uses a screen of some sort, or a booth, or a box of some kind. And I thought, well, let's look at this situation. Let's look at what we can do. So I started speaking to some other teachers and trainers of puppetry, some colleagues, some UNIMA colleagues, UNIMA, the International Association for Puppetry, Union Internationale de la Marionnette. And I started speaking to the UNIMA Training Commission, and I just thought, well, let's open this up. Let's bring some people together to talk about, on the one hand, the difficulties, on the other hand, the opportunities. So I put a call out. This was back in May. And I was just overwhelmed by the number of people who wanted to join this. There were a couple of stipulations that I put on the meetings. One was that we would be talking about puppetry performance practice and sharing ideas and how we could do this. Not talking about teaching theory, not talking about teaching making. Another stipulation that was that the people who joined the meeting should be people teaching and training in puppetry at university level or similar. I mean, there are lots of schools throughout the world where puppetry is being taught at a similar level to university courses, but it was not about teaching puppetry to children. It was not about teaching puppetry to people who might come and do one workshop in puppetry and never again. It was about teaching and training with adults who were undergoing some sort of serious professional study. And also the third thing was that these spaces were not a place for people to kind of promote their own product. They were a place for people to discuss and share and look at ways in which we could collaborate. Because I thought, you know, this is a chance for us to collaborate. And as always, we don't do enough of that collaboration. And partly we don't do enough of that collaboration because we are in different places, in different countries, and we've been restricted by geography, economies, language sometimes. But this was a chance for us actually to kind of be more generous with ourselves and with each other. One of the things that happened at the beginning of the pandemic which was really beautiful, which was people started putting free classes online and free shows online. And I thought, well, let's build on this beautiful impulse to be generous and to open up our work to other people. So something like 60 people signed up for these meetings, and because I said to people, let's, you know, pass this on to other people, let's make it as open as it can be. It was just incredible, actually. So following on from that, I decided to have 2 meetings rather than 1, because 60 people, 5 people, I think it was, talking in one Zoom space with all the attendant difficulties of Zoom fatigue, of being online and so on. The meetings were restricted to between 90 minutes and 2 hours each. Each person should introduce themselves very briefly. In the meetings, people then went into breakout rooms to discuss some particular questions about teaching puppetry performance practice. And from these 2 meetings that we held online with around 55 people in total, ideas were shared, and these were put together and shared with all of the people who attended, and other people have also been invited to see those notes as well. Then following on from that, I had a couple of meetings with the Unimar Training Commission about developing this idea into something that Unimar could hold as a project, because we don't know how long this, first of all, we don't know how long this situation will go on for.
Yeah.
Secondly, as I said earlier, it's an opportunity for us to make something new as well and find ways in which we can.
There are 2 things that I noticed. One thing that I noticed about this whole situation, I've never been in touch with so many puppeteers in my entire life. And I got this feeling that this whole closing situation brought everybody more close together. And something that would be at first really hard to think and do during this situation become, at least, I don't think more doable, but everybody seemed to be more willing to be together.
Yes. You know, Mario, one of the things I really liked about the meetings was that it brought some new people into those conversations. As you know, the Unimar Training Commission has been organizing some meetings between puppeteers and directors, trainers for some time. But sometimes there has been the same people coming to the meetings. And what I really liked about these new meetings is a whole bunch of new people came that I didn't know, that many people didn't know. And really, we found out so much about what people are doing. People from universities that don't have puppetry degrees, but there are people teaching puppetry and wanting to find out, wanting to know what other people are doing. People coming from new schools, new puppetry schools, even now that are being set up in Italy or Switzerland, one in Switzerland, one in Italy, and getting to know each other in a very different format.
I guess this whole situation opened some doors. People got more likely to be in touch with other people, and other people discovered that it's not so hard with all this technology we have in our hands nowadays to be in touch with other people. I guess people lost some kind of shyness of trying to get in touch with other people. But I would like to discuss a bit something that you bring up beautifully. I really begin to think about it in terms of education, but you mentioned this in terms of puppetry, which is we have to rethink what we do, and to go back to some basics of our art and our professions. After all, this situation that maybe some forms of traditional puppetry is now some kind of trendy or reinvented. You realize that throughout the meetings, or was that something that you are coming to think through the whole observation of the situation?
Yeah, I think that to kind of summarize what I think you are saying here and asking.
Yeah.
By the time we had the meetings, I had already been teaching puppetry online at that point for about a month. So I already had some reflections about the kinds of puppetry we could teach online and the kinds of puppetry we couldn't teach online, and the things that worked online and the things that we could develop as well online. So I already started thinking a little bit about what was possible, what the possibilities were in relation to small format theatre, outdoor theatre, using the screen as a frame, the relationship between the puppeteer and the puppet. So I already started to think about those by the time we had the meetings, but the meetings kind of confirmed it a bit and developed my thinking as well. I mean, I think the meetings serve different purposes, actually, Mario. I think one of the things that the meetings served was actually a space for people to go, ah! And there were people doing that. There were people saying, look, this is really hard. You know, this is not what I signed up for as a teacher.
Yeah.
I want to work with bodies. I want to work with objects in space and people really in communication with each other. And I think that that's interesting because that space to let it all out is also very important because it reaffirms what we do and what we want to do. So I think that part of it was very good.
Yeah.
So you go back to the question about how puppetry is returning to something and moving away from something and adapting something. In the article that I wrote for Moin Moin, and some of my thinking over the last few months has been about how in some way puppetry is kind of telling us what it wants to do. During the last sort of 30 years, as we know, puppetry came out of the booth, okay? So it came away from the invisible puppeteer. It came away from the frame. The frames became blurred. The frames became open stages and puppets and objects working in collaboration with human bodies, shifting relationships. You know, I have a puppet and I am not dominating. I am not telling it exactly what to do, but the puppet is sometimes dominating me, and this relationship between me and the puppet is changing all the time. Go away, you go away. You know, it's something that shifts and changes. So we've got used to that. We've also got used to what I call in some of my writing the high art of puppetry, where puppetry has tried to take higher status than popular puppetry has had, and it's tried to achieve high status by working in big theatres, in big groups of people, by adapting what we used to call bunraku into tabletop puppetry, by working on illusionism, if we want to use sort of Roman Pasca's terminologies, by working on the intense detail of giving life similar to the human body in some way. Those things, the deep illusionism, detail, big stage, collaborations with large companies, open stages, blurred relationships, those have all become part of the canon of puppetry, the established body of work that has been recognized as excellence in the last 20 to 30 years. That is what has been challenged. And I think that's actually really great and really exciting, because whereas maybe 20 years ago, people thought of puppetry as a glove puppet on your hand, something silly, something folk art, something popular to do with popular theatre. The established sort of high art of puppetry became what I just described, those big open stages with multiple puppeteers in dialogue and relationship. Of course, we still value that. But the pandemic threw us into a small booth space. And that's what I mean by puppetry returning to its roots in some way and telling us, hey, actually, the puppet, I don't have a puppet with me today at the moment. I'm away from home and I'm sorry I can't demonstrate this, but the puppet is this. The puppet is this, and it's only this. So one thing is, the puppet only has the booth.
Yeah.
It's there, it's alone in the booth. Its relationship to the space around it, it's very precise and it's very framed. That's absolutely one of the elements of traditional folk puppetry, is its relationship to its actual, real, framed booth, screen surroundings. That's one thing. Secondly, the screen is small, the booth is small. Popular puppetry often draws from very small spaces, from very small formats. And it's the precision of that small format that popular puppetry thrives on. And I think that's quite exciting. That we have an opportunity to revisit the relationship of the puppet to its space. The second thing is, we have a very interesting opportunity to revisit the relationship of the popular puppet to its audience. The popular puppet, I keep referring to it as the popular puppet. What is the popular puppet? The traditional puppet, the folk puppet, the mamulengo. Let's just call it the puppet. The puppet is so vulnerable. It's so vulnerable always. And now it's more vulnerable because it can't even get out off the screen. It can't even get out. So the relationship with the audience, again, it's returning to something very direct and maybe improvised, but which is about communication. You know, the puppet big stage with all of these puppeteers, with all the paraphernalia of high art puppetry. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes went behind the fourth wall. But now the puppet is again talking to us directly from its screen, from its booth, and communicating directly with an audience that it maybe can't see, but it can perceive. If we take that a little bit further and we do get off the screen, because we know that some forms of performance and interaction and communication are in fact possible, we're looking at puppetry that can only take place for audiences of 1, 2, 5, maybe 10 people. So we're returning to forms like Lambi Lambi, for instance, microtheatre, micropodium, forms that we adapt and create that will deliberately be for small audiences. So let's assume that these are happening live, that it will be possible in some places and in some circumstances to perform these live to small audiences. So again, the communication with those audiences will be very direct and particular. There will be a very specific relationship between the puppet or puppets and those audiences. I'm sort of drawn to recall some of the tropes and tendencies of immersive theatre, for instance. Immersive puppetry, where audiences will be able to move through a space and experience the whole sensorial and somatic experience of a space, and the narratives and stories that come out of that space, because people will need to be socially distant. They will need to have increased amounts of space around them. And of course, outdoor puppetry, processional puppetry, puppetry that is safer because it's outdoors. We've always been told that outdoor puppetry is beset with all sorts of difficult rules and regulations and safety aspects because of being in an open space. But now it's interesting that outdoor puppetry, which is again one of the traditional folk popular forms of puppetry, is safer. So so tiny format and outdoor puppetry seem to be the kind of directions we're going in.
Yeah, well, there's this saying that whenever we face a crisis like this one we're facing right now, we tend to go back to the principles of everything.
Yeah, you're quite right.
Yeah, we go back to the principles of puppetry, and we also go back to we're trying to discover some main principles of teaching puppetry as well. There's something you brought up that I think it's really something to think about, because in this kind of situation, not just using the puppet as a convenient technique for working with art, with theater right now, but also we can use the frailty of the puppet in order to discuss the whole frailty of our existence throughout these times.
Another big question, Mario, is where are these students going to work? So we also have to think about that. You know, we're training students for a world where they're going to have to find work and make work. And it may be that for some time, maybe longer term, we don't know yet, they're going to have to find work in a very different world. I just want to mention two other things about the kinds of things that we can teach that online, which were discoveries. Yeah. And these are, you know, none of these things are, well, actually there were many things we could teach online. So let's just reflect on those a little bit. One of the things that immediately kind of came to me when I was trying to teach puppetry performance online, and I mentioned it a bit, but I'll mention it again, was the direct relationship and the specificity of the relationship with the puppeteer. One of the things that you said recently, which I thought was quite true, Mario, is that you said that we can be lazy. There have been some lazy ways of working. You know, we teach the puppet who discovers its puppeteer. And goes back to the audience to tell the audience that it's discovered its puppeteer. But actually that relationship, you know, that kind of little sort of skit, it's quite simple. The discovery of the puppeteer and then what happens thereafter. But the detail and the levels of that relationship are something that you can work on very, very, very intensively. This is the kind of work that Neville Tranter does all the time. He is always in relationship with his puppets, and they are always in relationship with him as well. And we could say that every puppeteer is in relationship with their puppet, but that hasn't always been developed as fully as it might be. So I think online teaching gives us a massive and really great opportunity to teach and train the rigor, the discipline of that kind of level of relationship. So you always know exactly what your relationship with the puppet is. It isn't necessarily a sort of organically developed thing, but actually each moment that relationship changes and is precise and shifts and says particular things. That's one of the things. Another of the things that came out of the teaching was the use of the body and body parts, you know, to create different kinds of puppet figures, using your own body as a stage, using your own body for puppet heads, puppet arms, puppet legs, etc., to emerge from the puppeteer's own body. And again, this is something that can be worked with great rigor and discipline. And I think that these sort of sessions are their whole projects in their own right, using the body as a stage, corps castellé, as it's referred to in France, and using the work that companies like Hugo Inés have been doing so well for many, many, many years, to create narratives. You know, that's quite an exciting way of working as well, because, you know, that brings us into the ecological idea that, you know, we are all stages, we are all objects, we are all part of the world, we are all living beings. And so in the way that, again, you know, referring to other puppeteers, someone like Ilke Schönbein does so well. She uses her body as stage, narrative, documentary. The puppets come out of her body, they emerge from different parts of her body. And although she works on an open stage, the focus on the specificity of where the puppets come out of and how they react and respond to her body as stage is very exciting. So that's another thing that has come out of the work. Of course, using objects, object theatre. People were forced to use objects around them, domestic objects, cups of tea, kitchen implements, duvets, pillows, chairs, anything they could find, because most people suddenly had to return home without the chance to go shopping, collect things, go looking for the things they needed. So it's a good thing to be thrown into the situation where you have to use the things that you have around you. And I think, you know, I've certainly seen with my students, and I think many of the teachers and trainers have seen really interesting domestic object scenes. And again, that's, you know, there was a period of time when the intimate, the domestic, and the individual, the sort of autobiographical performance became very important in theatre itself. And I think that's been happening in puppetry in the last few months, where we're telling detailed, small narratives of the intimacy of our daily lives. And this is theatre that again is at the heart of puppetry. If you look back at companies like Faulty Optic, for instance, who created grotesque micro worlds of the stuff that happens to us actually when we're shut up in our flats, in our houses, in our bedrooms, in our homes, sometimes with people we don't want to be. I mean, I know of one puppeteer who was thrust into a situation where she was living with her family and she really didn't want to be with her family. So she stayed in her bedroom. When you stay alone and you're shut in, all kinds of things happen to the psyche and the psychology. Puppets inhabit that grotesque micro world really, really well. And I think the puppets, talking about things that puppets do well, puppets can tell grand narratives really well, but puppets can also tell strange, weird, twisted, fantastical, psychological, difficult worlds very well as well. Mm-hmm. I remember seeing a performance by the Chilean actor and puppeteer Hugo Medina about a character called Eladio, who was stuck in his bedroom with a set of dummies and he couldn't get out, and he was filled with remorse for all the things that he didn't do during the Chilean dictatorship. And he was stuck in this room talking to the dummies as kind of alter egos, and they were responding to him. It's that kind of internal narrative that can be shown so well through puppets that we've seen. Also, going back to some great puppetry, thinking about the show Hairman by Enno Podel back in the 80s, I think it was, with a puppeteer also stuck in a room and not able to get out, doing his daily exercises, making his cups of tea. also the tormented mind of the puppet. This puppet's wife was killed in a concentration camp in the Second World War. But it's the internal narrative, the intimate and the psychological, the domestic, that puppets are also able to do so well. So I've seen a huge number of domestic scenes of characters who are
fantastic.
Themselves, a testimony, individual narrative, autobiography.
Yeah, kinds of worlds we tend to meet, to come inside when in isolation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it brings back to, what you said, the frailty and the loneliness of the puppet, because the puppet is pretty lonely as a figure, I think. Also, sort of a social character, but also vulnerable and lonely.
I am remembering now some really important play for Brazilian puppetry in the end of the 80s, when they staged the Samuel Beckett's Act Without Words with puppets. And remembering now this display, it's a perfect display of somebody living in isolation. There's another really nice Brazilian play, The Principle of Onas, o princípio do espanto, in which we have the puppeteer and the puppet living some kind of lonely life together. And the play ends with the puppet acknowledging the puppeteer, which means for that situation that the puppet is no longer alone, but in a way that he had to die.
Yeah. I mean, I think puppetry is always tremendously psychological, and we don't always go into the meanings of that, but it's always tremendously psychological, because it's always performing another part of the psyche, another self, whether we try and escape that or not.
Yeah. Cariad, this has been a lovely talk, and I'm enjoying every inch of it. I wish I could just go on just provoking you, just poking on you, but I really have to round it up. So I'll finish our conversation asking you what the future holds for the teachers' meetings. What are you planning? What have the talks with the Unima Training Commission going? Do you plan to have more meetings? Where would you like it to go?
I do plan to have more meetings. I've been leaving it over the summer because a lot of people are out of their universities at this time, or at least I'm talking about the UK summer, European summer, I should say, Northern summer. Yeah. Let's call it. So there were some proposals that were made out of the meetings, and I think I'm going to be following up on some of those proposals. The first thing that happened is that we are all in touch now. So we all have access to a Google document where we know what each other is teaching and we know where we are. Because one of my great hopes was that we will be able to share some classes online.
Yeah.
There are all sorts of, delicate questions about authorship, ownership of material, payment of artists delivering workshops, and I think there are some sort of ethical questions about how much we can share with each other if we're sharing classes between institutions, where in some countries people are paying for their studies, and how much we open those up.
Okay.
The conclusion we came to, more or less, with that conversation is that those teachers and trainers who wished to could meet each other and collaborate in whichever way they would like to share their classes. But we wouldn't organize that ourselves, but that would be a question of individual people to do that via the information that they already have in the Google Doc. And I will certainly be contacting a few people and offering to share some classes, and hoping that I will also be able to participate, that my students will also be able to participate in some other classes. what I would really like is that through this situation of working online, now that we've all got used to more or less kind of communicating online, that I will be able to set up a project in collaboration with somebody else working in another university or another school, and actually we will be able to do a project together. That was my hope, to facilitate more of this, where people will be working across institutions together on shared projects. So that was the main hope, and I'll be following that up, and I think some other people in the group will be also following that up.
Yeah. Go on.
So I'm just kind of telling you some of the things that are planned and hoped for. One of the other things that was suggested is that people could share short sections of their own teaching with the whole group, for example, not for people to copy necessarily, but actually to provoke discussion and collaboration. So I'm going to be suggesting that some people might be able to offer very short mini kind of masterclasses, maybe one exercise, maybe sort of 10 people share one exercise that they've been working on that they could share. And we could put that together, and we could put that together in a shared video, which we could also then send to everybody in that group. That would be very, very useful.
Yeah, so it's easy for teachers who are already working for institutions to share some experience, but what can be done? As you were saying, I was thinking, what can be done in order to help these teachers who are not under institutions to use this network?
I think institutions the institutions that can will still be employing freelance artists, and those freelance artists, where possible, will be able to do. Some of them are already doing work online and leading masterclasses. I think those people will still be employed, but what is important out of the meetings is actually the dialogue that we're able to sort of build. And you know, people have been doing directing of performances online. There's been all sorts of initiatives happening, especially I think in Poland, to an extent in China, how to direct student work online. So that people will still be employed to do that. Obviously they have had to adapt their work, as we all have. And I think the Professional Training Commission is also looking at that question of how we can bring those people into the ongoing conversation without them using valuable paid working time, which is kind of what it comes down to for many people. It's their bread and butter, it's their source of income. So they need to be able to find ways of doing it, and for that not to be pushed out. None of the work we do will push those people out, because they will bring something incredibly valuable to the work. And as I say, the meetings are more about enabling the discussion and the collaboration between people.
Okay.
One of the other things that we haven't talked about this at all, but I do want to bring it in. One of the other things that came out very strongly from the meetings that we had was the importance for students to have this online collaborative space as well. We have created an online collaborative space, and I think we're going to be setting up some kind of forum for the teachers and the trainers, but the students also need that space. So we talked about setting up a forum where students would be able to pitch projects, look for collaborators across the globe, and just talk to each other and share their work, to post videos of the work they're doing, get more feedback. The opportunity that's given to us is to get more feedback, is to have more voices, more possibilities for collaboration and seeing each other's work in this kind of space. So I'd really like to find a way of setting up this student forum space where the students basically take ownership of that space, and they can post things and post ideas and share writing for all kind of ways, and to have that support as well, that international support. I don't know if you were involved at all in the International Online Student Puppet Festival that was set up in Tehran, Mario, but that was a really nice project that some people at Tehran University set up, and it took place about a month ago, where student puppeteers were invited to send in short pieces, and those short pieces were watched and judged by a jury, and I understand that there were some prizes given.
Whoa.
I think it would be really great if we could continue this initiative of an online student puppet festival. Now that it's been done, and there were some teething problems, but it was quite successful. And I know that a couple of other institutions have said that possibly they could host the next one. So I think that would be wonderful if we can continue this initiative and make a space for this to be an ongoing and sort of long-term festival of work.